I'll show you now how a document called a Statement of Applicability looks like and how to fill it out to be compliant with ISO 27001. And before I show you the document, let me explain you some key facts about this document. So first of all, this document is mandatory, so you must have it if you go for ISO 27000 certification, because otherwise you will not get certified. And by the way, for the certification auditor, this is one of the most important documents, because through this document you actually show all the controls, all the security measures that you're implementing in your company. So actually the auditor knows exactly what you're doing with regards to security in your company. So the purpose of this document is to define which of the controls which are listed in the Annex A of ISO 27001, and by the way there are 93 controls, so which of these controls are applicable in your company and which controls are simply not applicable to your company. And you have to write this document before you actually start implementing all of these controls. And this is something that you have to keep in mind, because lots of companies are actually making this mistake and they start implementing the controls and then only afterwards they write the statement of applicability, whereas you should actually first define which controls to implement and then actually start implementing them. Okay, let me now show you how the document looks like. Okay, I'm showing you now this statement of applicability from Advisor-as ISO 27001 documentation toolkit. And here you can see the first page of this document, which is basically similar in all the documents. Then you have a change history, table of contents, but the most important part is this section 3 with applicability of controls. So when I scroll down, you can actually see this is one big table. And in this table, you can see this ID of the control, and basically this ID is taken from ISO 27001 Annex A, also the control name. And then you can see also some other columns here, so applicability, justification for selection or non-selection, control objectives, implementation method, and status. So let's just scroll briefly through this document so you can see all the controls here are listed from the Annex A, so 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, and so on. And here you have 5.9, which is about inventory of information and other associated assets. So let's say that this control is applicable, so you write here yes. And then as justification, you say, okay, you're implementing this control because of some particular risks. So let's say that you have some risk number, let's say 231, also some other risk, let's say 332, something like that. But you can also write here some requirements from your clients. Let's say that you have agreement with client XYZ. And then control objectives. This is something where you can actually write what you want to achieve. So let's say list all information assets until end of the year. And then you have this implementation method where you basically specify how this is going to be done. So here you have a couple of suggested methods like inventory of assets, and then also information classification policy and IT security policy. And finally you have the status. So let's say that currently this control is not implemented yet. Let's say this is planned. And let's take as an example some other control which is, let's say, not applicable. So you say for this classification of information not applicable. And then you have to write the justification. So this is basically where you say that there are no risks, no requirements. Okay, and then objectives are not needed, implementation method is not needed, and status is not needed. So I'm simply deleting this here. And I mean, this is basically how you have to, write this whole document. Go one control at a time and fill out all of this information. Okay, let's go now through a couple of frequently asked questions regarding statement of applicability. So first question is which controls you actually have to list in the statement of applicability? Well, you have to list all the 93 controls from the Annex A. So this is a requirement. But you can also add on top of these controls some of the controls that do not exist here. So let's say that you want to comply with, let's say, SOC 2, or that you want to comply with the NIST cybersecurity framework. You can simply add those controls from these other frameworks to this list here. As simple as that. And of course, for each of those, you'll also have these columns here. And then next question is how do you know actually which control to mark as applicable and which one to mark as not applicable? Basically, there are three ways or three key inputs to make a control applicable. The first one is that there is any kind of a risk, unacceptable risk. The second one is that there is a requirement from an interested party. Primarily these are your clients and your partners. And the third one is, even if you do not have any risk or if you do not have any requirement, that then the senior management actually makes a decision that they want to implement this control because they think this is a good practice. And if you have none of these three, then you mark a control as not applicable. And the next question is which of these columns are mandatory and which are only optional? Now these columns, ID, a control name, applicability, justification, and status, these 5 columns are actually mandatory. This is something that the standard requires you. Now these control objectives and implementation method are not needed. These are not mandatory. And typically control objectives, you might have this only if you are, let's say, a larger company. Smaller, mid-sized companies typically will not have this level of detail, will not have an objective for each control, so you can actually delete this column for mid-sized and smaller companies. And this implementation method, so even though this is not a mandatory column, I would still actually recommend that you write it because it gives you a very good idea of how each control is implemented. Because if you don't have this information here, it will be much harder for you to manage your system, because you would not know exactly how each control maps to a particular document in your company or a particular process in your company. And also during the audit, it will be harder for you to find evidence. Next question is who is usually in charge of this document and who makes the decisions about which controls are applicable and which are not. Usually it's a security officer or anyone else who is in charge of security in your company. This person is usually responsible for this document because, again, as I mentioned, this is a crucial document. This is a central document for ISO 27001, and therefore the main person for security is or should be in charge of it. Now, when it comes to these decisions on what is applicable and what is not, typically this is done as a teamwork. And these decisions have to be made by a couple of people together. So a security officer, probably someone from the IT, like chief technology officer or head of IT, but also probably someone from the business side, because most of these controls will require some money. So it might be actually a chief financial officer. Then there are some decisions related to human resources. So you might have HR managers involved. And in smaller companies, you will also have typically CEO involved because many of these controls are actually covering the whole company. Okay, and what are some most common challenges when writing this document? From what I've seen, there are typically 2 biggest challenges. The first one is actually defining which control is applicable and which is not. And the second one is actually defining how to implement the controls that are applicable. Now, the answer to this first challenge is really to do this analysis, which helps you actually determine these risks and requirements, which I'll cover in a minute. And to overcome this second challenge is really to have some kind of a support, either through using some kind of templates for this document, or through using some kind of a software, or using a consultant that will help you throughout this process. Next question is, what exactly do you have to perform before doing this statement of applicability? As I mentioned, you actually have to find risks related to particular controls and also requirements from your customers. And to do this, you actually have to perform this systematic risk assessment, where you'll find all the risks and then define which risks are not acceptable and map those risks to particular controls. And regarding requirements from your customers, you actually have to go through all the customer agreements and other formal documents that you have with your clients, and then see if there are any security clauses in those documents which actually require you to do something. And then you have to map those requirements to particular controls here in this statement of applicability. And the last question is, what exactly do you have to do after the statement of applicability? After you complete this statement of applicability, the next step is actually that you write this risk treatment plan. And basically, risk treatment plan is a document where you specify how you're going to implement all of these controls that you marked here as applicable. Or to be more precise, you actually have to include in your risk treatment plan all the controls that are applicable that are not implemented yet. So if you have, let's say, several controls that you marked in your status column that a particular control is implemented, then you do not have to mention it in the risk treatment plan. But if any control is applicable and not implemented, then you have to specify in the risk treatment plan who is going to implement this control, with which resources, what are the deadlines, and so on. So ultimately, this risk treatment plan becomes your implementation plan for this statement of applicability. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about statement of applicability, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And to see this document for yourself, sign up for a free trial of Advisor's ISO 27001 documentation toolkit, and you'll be able to download a free demo of this document together with a free demo for all the other documents that are needed for this standard. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel not to miss any of my new videos, and I publish videos about cybersecurity governance and AI governance every week. Thanks for watching.